Slow robot? Okay. We're going to talk about transitions today and how that relates to finishing music. So, first thing, I guess what we'll do is I'll kind of give an overview of what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to start out just kind of giving a high level overview of some of the things that you can do from a mental kind of state to get started with transitions and understanding how they work. And then I'll go into this song here, which I'm going to show some of the kinds of transitions that I did in the song. And, you know, I really wanted to do a bunch of like music that I love from other artists, but I don't want to go up against the whole getting blocked on YouTube and all that stuff. I don't want to deal with any of that. So we're going to use my music. But I'll go through some of the different kinds of transitions that you can use, how they work and that kind of thing. But yeah, so starting out, so those high level things, like what you can do from a mental preparation standpoint, the first thing is to try to think of your song as one piece of continuous music instead of, you know, a discrete collection of connected loops. And obviously that's true because that's exactly what your song is going to be at the end of the road. It's going to be a piece of continuous music. But I think it's really easy to fall into the mindset where I have this loop and I have this loop, and you're not thinking about it as like these two pieces of music are the same piece of music. I just have to figure out how they're the same piece of music. So that's the first thing. And then another thing you can do to kind of prepare yourself is really, again, kind of obvious. Just listen to the music you love and try to pick apart what's working with the transitions in the music that you're already listening to. You know, you may like the verses and the choruses and the bridges on their own of the music that you listen to, but if you're not paying attention to how they get from one to the other, you're missing a huge part of the picture. Now, sometimes that may be, you know, sometimes those transitions can be really quick. They can be just going from one part straight into another part. Other times they can be, you know, take turns. They can weave in and out and that kind of stuff. There's all sorts of different ways that you can make a transition work. You know, melodically, rhythmically, all that stuff. And take a listen to that stuff and really pay attention to it. Understand what it is you like about that transition. And as you're listening to that, you're going to internalize it over time and find things that resonate with you in terms of how those transitions are working. So then there is the idea of just doing it and practicing. So obviously every time you do something, the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Transitions are no different. Finding effective transitions is no different. Just figure it out. Work at it. You know, that's why you have the undo command in Reason, and in every other DAW, you can undo to your heart's content. You know, try something. If it's not working, back up and try something different. Never be afraid to experiment. That's how you're going to find the best stuff for you. So again, or another thing, you can use what you already have to help find something new. And so this kind of goes back to the earlier video I did on blocks, where you're taking sort of the same instrumentation, the same ideas, and you're just kind of tweaking them a little bit as you go along. So one of the things I like to do is you take a sound, a particular sound that you have, and like, I really like this, like piano patch or whatever it is, and you play it, and you got your first loop of that, right? You got that, and then one of the things you can do is just starting a different section, just move along into a different section and find a different type of thing that you can play with that piano patch that sounds good. Now, it may be very different from the original thing that you already recorded, that loop that you have. It may be very different, but you can always get from point A to point Z. The question is, how quickly are you going to get there, and how are you going to get there? What are the steps you're going to take along the way? So the idea here is just generating the idea first. You got your two ideas. You got the first one you came up with, and then this new idea, which is based on the same patch, and you can then figure out how to get from point A to point Z. And then another tip you can use is to just hit record and go. So again, if you pull up a patch that you like and you're just vibing with it, it works for you, just hit the record button, let it run for 15 minutes and just noodle around, play around with it, figure something out, and transition, do your own transitions as you go, figure out, jam, basically you're jamming. And once you have that, chunk of music recorded, you can go back and say, all right, I like this section, and I like this section. You pull those out, and then you've got new sections of music to work with that you can, work to transition from one to the other. So then this whole idea of transitioning obviously goes very hand in hand with generating ideas. I mean, that's the fundamental piece of transitioning, is coming up with an idea to get from point A to point B. So those are the kind of, well, actually one more thing. So the realization that every choice that you make in music or artistically is arbitrary. So it doesn't really matter, whether you just decide to go with a really jarring transition or you decide to go with, something more gradual. Ultimately, the song is going to be the song, whichever way you go, whatever way you decide to put it together, and whatever kinds of transitions you put into it, it's always going to end up the way it ends up, right? So don't worry too much about, following pre-existing ideas that you may have, or that a particular genre of music may have, for how to get from point A to point B. You don't need to worry about that. You shouldn't need to worry about that. Do what works for you, and realize that ultimately you don't have to adhere to any particular, way of working, any particular mode of working. You just need to find something that works for you and makes you happy. Okay, so I'll go briefly through some of the kind of high level types of transitions that kind of just come up top of mind for me. All right, so there's two, I think, large kind of broad categories of transitions. There's the most common and easy one to do, which is the jarring transition. And so that is going to be a really kind of common thing in rock music, where you're going from one type of feel and vibe, and then you're immediately going from that into something else. Again, happens a lot in rock music, happens a lot in all sorts of other kinds of music too, but it's a very quick transition. Usually it doesn't really require much more than a drum fill to get from one thing to the next. So that's the first broad category. And then the next is the continuous transition. And so this is going to be kind of broken down into a little bit further into transitions that happen suddenly, but also they're not as jarring. So that might be filtering and doing risers and that kind of thing, where you're kind of staying on the same general vibe until the end of that part, but you're kind of adding something to just kind of get from one section to the next. Another one of those would be the pause and reset, which is where you're section ends on a note, and it just kind of either hangs there or fades out, or it can end very staccato, and then there's like a, you know, a brief pause, whether that's 4 bars or 4 beats or 2 beats or that kind of thing, and then it comes into the next section. So you kind of have like just a brief period of time where nobody's adding more notes before the next section comes in. So it's just kind of a pause there. And then it goes into the next thing. Then there are these kind of slight changes, which you would be something like taking a progression, whatever you have going on in your first section, and then you're maybe changing up the rhythm, or you're changing up the tempo, or you're changing up the time signature or instrumentation, but overall the same progression is still there in the next section. You're just kind of modifying it a little bit. And this again goes back to the blocks video that I did. A lot of that same kind of stuff could be applied here. They're kind of interchangeable sort of techniques. And then another version of that kind of slight transition, continuous transition, would be interludes. So like a really brief kind of thing that just it introduces an idea in a very short time frame that takes you from one idea into the next. So that's really common. And then the second kind of bucket within the continuous side of things would be really gradual transitions, where you're really just taking the part and you're really gradually going from one idea to the next. So an example of this might be a really long drawn out rock buildup. So if you've ever played guitar in a band, or any kind of instrument in a band, you know, you may be vamping on the same progression for a really long time, but you may find yourself building it up over and over and over time, over this long stretch of time, and it's getting louder and louder, and different things are coming into the mix and going out of the mix over the course of that, and then you end up in a different place than you started. So those are kind of the two overarching buckets, would be the jarring transition and then the two different kinds of continuous transitions. So with that said, I guess let's go into this song again, using my own music, just because I don't want to deal with copyright claims or anything like that on YouTube. So let's just take a listen. So this one is called The End of All Things We Know, which is the last song on my album. But I guess I'm just going to kind of take this kind of section by section and go into how I got from each piece, each section to the next throughout this. So we'll take a listen to the second half of this first verse here. So you can hear it's a really laid back kind of vibe here. This here is the pre-chorus, so it's transitioned from that verse part, but it's still the same. It's still the same overall progression, going from one to the other. But I signal that it's a different part by that little guitar line at the end of the verse. So here's that transition again. And obviously vocals come in there, but this is the real heart of this first transition. Again, this is because it's the same progression, it doesn't feel like a whole lot has changed, and a whole lot hasn't changed, but it signals that it's a different part because I've added this little fill, this little guitar fill there. So let's listen to just that. So that just that that's like the heart of this song, and it just signals the end of that part and the transition into the next. So let's listen to that next section going into the chorus. Same thing again, but it's the same thing again, that same little riff at the end, transition goes into the chorus, but it's a different progression now. It's how it goes back into the pre-chorus. So it's actually, the pre-chorus is also acting as a post-chorus. So let's listen to just the bass in there and just compare that to what's going on in the pre-chorus. Dun, dun. That's all it is. But then we get into the pre-chorus, post-chorus, and it becomes this. So it's a little bit different, but it's got the same, it's a little bit different, but it's got the same vibe overall. It's just that dun 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 dun, you know, that same pulse in it, and that's why it transitions so easily from one to the next. All right, so let's hear how it goes from so now it's the post-chorus / pre-chorus back into the verse. Again, it's the same progression, so it's a very easy transition. Instrumentation, really, and the intensity of it. So there's some filtering going on, that the filter opens up a little bit on this bass synth in these second in the post-chorus and in the pre-chorus, the second pre-chorus. That filter opens up on the bass synth just to give it a little bit of extra energy. And so this is just something that, again, super simple ways to transition. You're not even really doing anything to transition. You're just letting the same part do something a little bit differently. And you know, this happens a lot in all sorts of music. You know, you take a verse and your chorus is the same thing as the verse, it's just louder, or vice versa. You know, all perfectly valid ways to get transitions into your music and keep your song moving forward. All right, so the second transition is the same as the ones we've already heard. So we're getting into the end of the chorus here, and this is transitioning into the bridge from here. So let's listen to that. So you see, this kind of goes into that sort of sudden, it's a sudden transition, so it would maybe fall into that jarring category, but maybe not, because it's it also kind of, when you go from loud to quiet like this, it also has that kind of same effect that I mentioned before, where you're doing a pause and reset instead of just letting it ring out for 4 beats. It's going from a louder part to a quieter part, and it just allows it to breathe a little bit more and reset that way. So let's listen to that again. And so this whole section here builds up. So you can hear this. It's starting to build up a little bit, and you know, it's all just layering. That's all it is. You know, I'm not changing the progression or anything. It's just layering to get from one energy level to a different energy level, and it's going to keep building up to the end of this. So let's listen through. I lied. It doesn't even build up. It just kind of keeps going at that. You know, once it gets to that level, it gets it stays the same. But at the end here, we get to one of those, you know, riser filtery kind of transitions. So how did I get from this to a lot louder version of that? I again did it's a jarring transition, and then this kind of brings back to the another point. You can combine these types of transitions almost always. So the transition from here to here, from the first half of the bridge to the second half of the bridge, it's a jarring transition, but it also is using that filtering down or riser type of transition. So let's listen to how that sounds. So you can hear I just added a filter there, and it's just taking that really I think the whole mix gets that filter, and I don't even know where it is. Oh, here it is. So I'm just filtering everything out. It's a low pass filter. It gradually goes down at the end there, and then the filter just shuts back off, you know, bypass, and lets everything through and the next downbeat, and it, you know, gives the sense of energy and movement. And then the next transition is just going from that into the last chorus, and it's already got the energy that I need, but it's resolving from this back into the chorus in a way that I feel is pretty. It feels satisfying to me. So let's just take a listen to that. So that's, you know, it's an easy transition to make. Those two parts go really well together right out of the box. So this would count as a jarring transition as well as kind of a slight transition, because they're just compatible parts. And that kind of goes back to, again, the blocks thing. It's you know, really just playing around with the ideas that you have to see, you know, can you just take these two different pieces of music and jut them together, and do they work in that way? And if they don't, but you want to get from one to the other, how do you do that? You have two different pieces of music that you like. You have to figure out a way to get there, right? And so this kind of goes back to the whole you know, every artistic choice you make is arbitrary. you can always get from point A to point Z. Like I said, you can always find a way. You can make it a jarring transition, or you can take something in one key that's at 90 BPM in 4/4, and you can transition it to something that's in a completely different key that's at 220 BPM and is in 7/8. You can always do that. Any song, you get two pieces of music that couldn't be more different, and you can find a way to transition them. And it really comes down to, are you willing to do it, and how are you going to do it? So we'll listen to this last one, and then I'll give some final thoughts, I guess. So the last transition is just the end of the song, and it's just again, this is a filtering transition here. So, end of the song, that's also a transition. You're transitioning from something happening to something not happening. And again, you can play with it any way you want. Sometimes you can just end it in a weird spot, and that's cool. Sometimes you can do a filter like this. Sometimes you can fade out. By the way, fading out has fallen out of favor for some reason. I don't understand it. Fade outs are awesome, and I think they should make a comeback. Anyway, that is pretty much it for kind of showing some of the examples, but back to the main kind of idea here. So the bottom line really is that you just really have to figure out what works going from one thing to the next, and you have to be willing to be playful about it. You know, you can take an existing progression and, like I said, just change a little bit of it. You can take, that's a transition. You can take that and you can go from playing it in a very kind of staccato way and then play it in a legato way. That's a transition. Vice versa. One of the things that I like to do, as I did in this one, is to take a transitional line like that last guitar bit in this verse, so that last note of that guitar line indicates where then the next thing is going to be, or at least gives a hint at where it should be. So, you know, think about your fills and stuff. Where is that fill taking you? Are you happy with it? First of all, if you're happy with the fill, then let it guide you to the next thing. So even if I was to change the actual progression in the pre-chorus here, I would still use this end guitar line to guide me where I want to go next. So that indicates something in, you know, whatever, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be the same note, but something in that note is compatible with would be usually where I would start working on a next progression that I might do. And similarly, you know, the same thing with progressions themselves. You know, you can take a progression and just change one chord in the progression, and that can be an effective way to, you know, have add a new section to the song very easily. You just change one of the chords in there, or even changing just the intervals in the chords that you have can yield interesting results. So it's really, again, just, you gotta play around. Don't be afraid to do whatever, you know, try different things. That's going to get you more comfortable with doing transitions. you're going to find things that you like that you may not have heard of before by playing around. You know, watching YouTube videos is all fine and good, but you know, to get techniques on this stuff, but until you start getting your hands in there and doing it yourself, you know, you're kind of limiting yourself to what you've seen already. So yeah, just play around with it and figure out what works for you. But that is it for this one, I think. I may do some more stuff on this topic at some point, probably will, but that covers pretty much most of it. So hopefully you found this helpful, and yeah, take care.